Our next program this morning is the Open University.
Extraordinary. There was just a bird in my kitchen. I left the window open in my kitchen and a little bird flew in, like a finch. And it flew out as soon as I made my entrance. That's really the operative phrase today, because I'm talking about performativity. I made an entrance into this self-constructed stage, which is my presentation to you in these Open University broadcasts. These are the way I perform my ideal self. I put it together like a theatrical role, and then I kind of improvise on stage, and it's quite exciting every Thursday or whenever I do these things. I've been doing it now for 3 years, I think. I think I started just after the 2016 Brexit referendum, actually, because I saw a kind of incipient fascism taking over a thuggery. And I thought my values, my sort of bourgeois values, needed to be pushed in the world somehow. The time had come for me to speak out and declare the virtues of whatever I stand for, whatever I believe in, and maybe to work through and work out what those virtues are, and vices as well. Any theatre piece has to have a mixture of virtue and vice to be interesting. So I hope I've given, maybe I haven't enough emphasized the downside, and maybe I should do that maybe a bit more in future. You know, I can certainly see lots wrong with my life, that it's overprivileged and it's perverse in various ways. But let's go back to this idea of performativity. My girlfriend Nono is going to theatre school, is applying now for theatre schools, and she's doing auditions to get into the schools. And she, of course, appeared a couple of videos ago as herself, being interviewed, being talked to by me, performed herself in that role. And some people thought that she was being maybe too modest and shy, and that our relationship was somehow insalubrious and fishy. And most people, the huge majority of people, were really charmed by it. But I think I would emphasize that even a projection of a shy personality is a theatrical presentation of one's self. And that it's part of the purpose of these presentations, these self-exhibitions, this mise en scène of the self, that we do it in order to maximize our power over others, or our charm, which might be the same thing as power, our power to charm. It's not really work, it's just the power to charm.
Whose works are but extensions of his power to charm.
The power of a sort of chivalric self-presentation, and by that I would say more chivalric, of course, is a medieval, the code of horsemanship, the aristocratic code by which you are always at someone's disposal, at someone's disposition. You're always using rhetoric to self-abase, to be humble and shy and modest, and to be absolutely at every moment at the disposal of the other person. And this really, this was the European mode, at least the aristocratic mode, for many centuries. I am your humble servant, I am at your disposition, please ask me anything you want. I mean, if it wasn't actual outright conflict, it would tend to be this chivalric mode. I call it the chivalric mode anyway, which is, of course, a great flourishing kind of politesse, and probably is more French than anything else. But I would associate it now. I think that the cultures now that still have this chivalric mode are particularly the Japanese culture, which is one reason it's so pleasant once you get to Japan, that everybody is absolutely bowing to you. There's a sort of medieval and feudal kind of atmosphere there. But the important thing to note is that you respond with an equally self-abasing manner. And it's not like if somebody is modest, shy, self-abasing, at your disposal, etc., etc., you're going to abuse that. If you do, they will switch to another mode, and they will switch to the same kind of brutal and aggressive mode that you have. The West's criticality is a double-edged sword. It's toxic, and it causes conflict, and it causes schism, especially within the left. You know, a lot of people attacking other left-wing people for perceived aberrations and, not being with the program and not being on the page, on the script. But the upside is that, criticality is valuable sometimes, and it's great to protest about things and to have a different point of view. That's a creative thing to do. In the East, you have the double-edged sword of a team spirit and a harmony and this chivalric attitude of politeness, which I'm describing. But of course, the downside of that is conformity, lack of protest movements, lack of reform, lack of general social progress happening from the grassroots up. So they've both got upsides and downsides, but it is refreshing. There is a vlogger I follow, this guy who used to live in Osaka, and he's now moved to Berlin. He's British, but he's partly Malaysian in his his ancestry. And he's the first thing he found when he moved to Berlin, he's staying in Mitte in an Airbnb, was he went to his local Rewe supermarket and got change thrown at him. Literally, the cashier just threw the change onto the conveyor belt rather than putting it into his hand. And he was very shocked by the rudeness of that. It was my first impression coming back in 2018 from Asia to Germany that people were tremendously rude. They treat you like a criminal when in fact you're a customer. But let's get back to this performativity idea. I mean, cultures, it's worth pointing out that societies collectively perform their own ideas of themselves as well. So as part of the mythos, if you like, of Berlin, that it's a rude, brash and direct city, where nevertheless a certain kind of freedom reigns, and there is a certain kind of individualism which is fruitful, which is simply another face of that rudeness. The rudeness is just one side of it, and you have to look at the city's amazing, the sort of brash spirit that you get in the Threepenny Opera is partly derived from John Gay's Beggar's Banquet and the London of the sort of 17th century, 18th century. But it's also a Berlin attitude of, we're going to be brash, we're going to tell you what we think of you. I moved through the city, excuse me, my actor's voice is failing me. I moved through the city presenting myself, partly in a kind of deliberately misinterpreted way, a misinterpreted version of its own myth, which I've picked up through things like Brecht and Pabst and Bowie and Kraftwerk and Humana, second-hand clothing stores, old DDR clothing. One of the interesting things is that this is a schizophrenic city. This is one of the aspects that attracted David Bowie to it in the 70s. It was a city that was divided between East and West. It had two of everything. It was two cities squeezed together, even more radically than Minneapolis and St. Paul, because one was communist and one was capitalist. So you had right there the ideological schism of the world cutting through a single city with a wall down the middle of it. That was fascinating because it represented a personality which was cloven in two. But it's also, cultures in general have this, like individuals, have this sense of what they are and what they can be. So I moved through the city kind of maybe deliberately misinterpreting, saying in some ways, same in Japan a little bit. In some ways I say, listen, my idea of Japan is a Heian Kyoto idea of elegance and aestheticism, where everybody could speak in poetry and they wore amazing robes, which they never changed incidentally, and they just cleaned themselves by adding perfume. They never took off their 8 or 10 layers of differently colored robes, but which were exquisite silk and beautiful craftsmanship and designs and things on them. Why don't you Japanese go back to that? It's kind of my reproach to them. And I wear that reproach kind of silently in my outfits and things. And I don't know, it's a little bit the same in Berlin. I would, if I were attacked here, and I kind of am attacked in a very, in a microaggressions kind of scale on a daily basis. I was walking in the Schillerkiez a few days ago in a white van. It's always inevitably white vans went past and they shouted out the window something. I think a Turkish guy shouted out the window something at me. Wie geht's? How's it going? Blah, blah, blah. I couldn't hear who he was comparing me to. Usually it's Johnny Depp in that Pirates film, but I had sunglasses on, so I didn't look like Johnny Depp in the Pirates film. So it was somebody else. I had oversized sunglasses. Maybe it was, how's it going, Jackie Onassis or something, because I had a sort of headscarf, which made me look a bit like a female impersonator. And actually a lot of the clothes that I wear on a daily basis are female clothes because they're simply more interesting. They have more interesting forms and colors, as far as I'm concerned. But yes, you are judged, and you are making. I think it's fair game. You know, I wasn't insulted. I didn't react particularly. The van sped off, and that area is a particularly contested area. The new kind of Cold War is not between communism and capitalism. It's between sort of young, thin people, usually speak English, who've sort of parachuted in their creative class. They're people who've come to Berlin for a better and freer life than they could have had in London and New York or even Tokyo. And this indigenous class of Germans who are probably older and fatter, and they sit in their Kneipe, their kind of traditional German drinking clubs, maybe playing billiards, snooker, and drinking beer and getting even fatter at the waist. But they see their area, an area like the Schillerkiez, invaded by these younger people. And of course they feel threatened, and of course there's a tension there. And there's also this third element of the Turks who are neither one nor the other, but probably were living in some sort of uneasy balance with the old white Germans until the hipster kind of, the skinny, productive people came along. They're productive only in the sense of a semiotic productivity, that they actually sit at their Mac books all day long in cafes, drinking very expensive coffee and producing ideas and producing spin and presenting themselves on Instagram and all the rest of it, doing what I do. I'm very much one of that class. You know, there's not much I can do about that. I can put a bit of a spin on it and say I'm an eccentric, and I might bring some of the values of different creative classes than those people who are in the co-working space up the street from here, for instance, or Passenger Coffee, again, up the street from here. I probably have, you know, more, having lived in New York and Tokyo and London, doing creative stuff, freelance all my life, I've probably got a slightly different spin than most of those people, and I'm older, obviously, than most of those people. What am I trying to say? Let's go back, let's be a little bit academic and talk about the presentation of self in everyday life, which is a book title. Erving Goffman, an American sociologist, actually Canadian sociologist, wrote this book and published it in Scotland in 1956 originally. I'm not quite sure why it came out in Scotland before it came out in America. It came out 3 years later in the US and went on to win lots of prizes, and it's often listed in the top 10 of the most influential and important sociological treatises ever. And it's really taking a dramaturgical idea of the presentation of oneself. I've got this video of me in Japan 3 years ago talking about cool, how my ideas of cool had changed and what it means to be cool, cool as cultural capital, all that stuff. Is David Bowie cool? You know, David Bowie, my role model. In the presentation of self as everyday life, Goffman basically says that we prepare ourselves, our sort of best selves, for its daily presentation. Interesting thing about this corona crisis is that we're often doing that much more digitally. We've all apparently run to seed, and we're wearing tracksuit bottoms, and my only kind of main sort of appointment for the next weeks is to do a virtual online only presentation in the McNally bookshop in New York to launch my book, I think on July the 30th. And I'll have to do that because of the time gap. I have to do that at 1 in the morning until about 3 a.m. European time, which is 7 in the evening onwards, New York time. And I'll be able to do it with tracks. Not that I wear tracksuit bottoms ever. I'm sort of self-presenting at any time of the night and day. There is no informal for me, but the point is that I'll be doing it within the proscenium arch of people's computer screens or of a screen in the bookstore. I suppose the idea is that people go to the bookstore to watch this computer-mediated self-presentation. Of course, I'm quite used to computer-mediated self-presentation, having done it in these videos a long time. But Goffman's idea is that we have a kind of stage. I mean, I entered from the center stage, not from the wings. I've got a wings entrance as well. This is my stage here. It ends, I can't move much forward in case I blur and get out of focus and you don't see the whole me. I kind of like the whole me being in the picture. This is my props, you could say, my bookshelves. Of course, Zoom presentations, famously a lot of people showing off their bookshelves. I have the best bookshelves of anyone, as you probably know. These are the most hefty and intellectual and interestingly eclectic bookshelves. of anyone you're going to see in any of those television presentations using Zoom. I don't use Zoom. I haven't used Zoom yet, actually. And that's my costume department over there, my clothes, which I assemble each day to present something. I don't know quite what I want to present. I'm not really sure about the development of my props department, my costume department. You know, over the years, I'm not sure that in my 20s I was that great a dresser. I was influenced by, say, Malcolm McLaren's idea of new romantic dressing, like pirates, and which is why I wore pirate eye patches even before I needed to wear an eye patch, even before I had the eye problems. I think I wore a lot of my dad's old cast-off suits from the 60s because they fitted me and because they were free, and because enough time had elapsed for them to have changed their meaning. It wasn't like me slipping into dad's clothes. It was a kind of ironic statement in an 80s style of affiliation with early 1960s kind of values. He would have tropical suits and houndtooth checked suits and waistcoated, three-piece suits and all the rest of it. But so I could wear those, but I would wear them with sandals or something just to deliberately throw off the semiology of them. Another interesting book is I got better, I think, mainly through thrifting and learning to recontextualize old styles and cheap items of clothing from thrift stores. I think I probably got better, but maybe not everyone agrees. I know that not everybody likes these drop crotch kind of trousers that I wear. It's very much a statement against American imperialism, though. Jeans, I'm absolutely sick of jeans. And the whole notion of sportswear as a universal seems as fascistic and Darwinistic, Hobbesian, whatever, to propose that everybody wears, people who are slobs and whose bodies are running to seed nevertheless wear sportswear. And I was just reading a kind of thing about some new Nike trainers today on Dezeen. They're called the Nike ISPA Zoom Road Warrior trainers, and they actually kind of appealed to me. They're kind of high tech, but they have a sort of pastel, semi-translucent look to them, and I kind of don't, also out of hand dismiss the idea of there being high tech shoes that I might wear. I find trainers very ugly. These big, clumpy, ugly, dirty white trainers that people wear are ugly to me. And so I've very much, adopted these Repetto shoes, which Serge Gainsbourg used to wear, as my kind of shoe of choice if I'm not wearing flip-flops. Yes, I couldn't possibly. I've now got to the stage where it just wouldn't be me at all to wear trainers or those high-tech sports-derived shoes. The whole paradox just seems so stupid. Well, first of all, it seems way too mainstream. The idea of that we hone a high-tech garment through competitive sports and laboratories and all the rest of it, and then we launch it onto the mainstream market and slobs can buy them and wear them. But of course they're also very expensive. They're pretty much almost as expensive as these Repettos, which are like 265 euros, but like gloves for the feet, and also have this kind of 1950s smart look to them, and I find that they enhance any outfit that I wear. Let's go back to the sociologists. This is The Social Construction of Reality by Peter Berger and Thomas Luckman, which is sort of a British take on the theatricality idea of Irving Goffman. And just reading pretty much at random, here's a paragraph. The most important vehicle of reality maintenance is conversation. One may view the individual's everyday life in terms of the working away of a conversational apparatus that ongoingly maintains, modifies, and reconstructs his subjective reality. Conversation means mainly, of course, that people speak with one another. But of course, it can be a one-way conversation, like you might make a video, like the one I'm doing just now. This does not deny the rich aura of nonverbal communication that surrounds speech. Nevertheless, speech retains a privileged position in the total conversational apparatus. It's important to stress, however, that the greater part of reality maintenance in conversation is implicit and not explicit. Most conversation doesn't say in so many words, let's define the nature of the world. Rather, it takes place against the background of a world that's silently taken for granted So an exchange like, it's time for me to go to the station, fine darling, have a good day at the office, implies an entire world within which these apparently simple propositions make sense. By virtue of this implication, the exchange confirms the subjective reality of this world. Which makes me wonder, Irving Goffman talked about theatre, and I guess he was using the model of a sort of 19th century realistic theatre, but he was writing at the time of the theatre of the absurd, and people like Ionesco and even Samuel Beckett and Harold Pinter portraying a kind of, or Harold Pinter put it as a kind of desperate rearguard attempt to keep oneself to oneself. So his conversations are often at cross purposes and often pointless and surreal and silly, and the tramp's going down to Sidcup to get his papers, but he never actually goes, all that stuff. So it makes you wonder what a kind of non-coherent, non-consistent theatrical presentation of self might look like. Maybe it would look like the presidency of Trump in the US, who knows. I've been talking of vlogging and self-presentation and the continuous creation of a self that seems to work. I've been watching a guy called Nelson Sullivan, who some of you may know as the first vlogger, essentially, someone who bought a chunky video camera in the 80s. He worked for a classical music publishing company near the Carnegie Hall in New York, and he was gay and very much a club kid. He loved going to clubs. He bought a house in the meatpacking district at a time when the meatpacking district was literally just packing meat. Now it's, where the Whitney Museum is, and there's all the luxury brands there. It's sort of self-presentation for extremely rich people. Although if you look on Street View at what it looks like now, his house now on, I think, number 5 9th Avenue at the intersection with Gansevoort Street. Now it's either very, very slim, rich people, tourist type people, or it's kind of really fat guys with baseball caps and security apparatus in terms of lots of police cars everywhere, lots of private security everywhere. So you see in that 30 years since he died, Nelson died in 1989 of a heart attack. Not sure whether he had HIV or not. There's a fantastic archive on YouTube of his videos, and including the very last video he made on just a couple of hours before he died of this heart attack, in which he rather presciently says this is the last time, the last day for me before I stop running, because he'd just been given an actual TV show on, I think, cable television, and he was going to start doing that, but he died before he could start. But he's very exemplary as someone who was using, he wanted to, I think, write books and present his life in that way, but he was influenced, of course, by Warhol and The Factory, and he gathered around himself a group of people, including RuPaul, sort of drag queens and club kids, including Michael Allig, the notorious club entrepreneur and killer who murdered a drug dealer who used to deal drugs in his own club. And they would go on, coach trips to Washington, D.C. to check out a new club, or they would go to Coney Island, and the New York of the 80s is really beautifully captured, as if it were a vlogger, time shifted back from this decade to the 80s, capturing it all for posterity. And the video archive is put together by my friend Steve Lafreniere, who was really an amazing guide to my New York days when I lived for 2 years in New York in the first couple of years of this century. And Steve was working for Index magazine at that point, and very much keyed into the gay scene and the club scene. So I'd go to the Pyramid Club and all these places that I see in Nelson's videos, Nelson Sullivan's videos. Nelson Sullivan, presenting people whose whole, because it's very much the kind of Paris is Burning world, that voguing world of people like RuPaul's Drag Race, all that stuff, which later became much more mainstream. Madonna picked up on it, and they were all kind of in Madonna's orbit anyway already at that point. But it became fascinating as an insight into how people from, poor backgrounds, South Carolina, black people, whatever, who came up to New York and got into this gay circuit. It became a kind of star-making machinery modeled on the Warholian star-making machinery, where you could have everyday superstars and they could present themselves in outrageous, over-the-top ways. They were extremely performative and very, very consciously manipulating the threads, often literally with sewing machines on the table, putting together the dress they would wear that night in a club. The threads of self-presentation. So I find that fascinating, particularly when there's a time gap and you can see 30 years ago, what it was like in a particular time that you knew later on. It's fascinating. But I also admire it in today's vloggers. I do find it fascinating, and I do think that going to drama school, in a way that going to art school, even if you don't become an artist, as most art school graduates don't become practicing artists who can make a living from doing art, nevertheless, creativity is absolutely central to the whole human enterprise. Brainstorming our way out of problems and coming up with new things is super essential. I'm really missing the art school degree shows, which I usually go to this time of year when they're happening. Just now, of course, they're all cancelled. Coronavirus has been a huge spanner in the works, a wobbly in humanity's path, and we don't know. It is going to create some interesting change, though, and I think it might even create some good things. But I'm missing the degree shows, and if you're learning to be an actor or an actress, obviously now is a very unstable time, because you don't know when people are going to be allowed back into theatres in the first place and what form acting might take. It's not the same watching actors in a little, on your computer screen. It's just, it's a whole different thing, isn't it? So, but in the same way that creativity is important for art school graduates and for everybody, really, but it's particularly well taught at art schools, at good art schools. So learning theatre might well stand Nono in good stead for pretty much anything she's going to do later in life. At the same time, with the proviso that she is already, as we all are, I think, in some way, a master manipulator of her own image, and I think that isn't being taken into account by people who just buy the idea that she's sort of naive and might be a pushover and all the rest of it, and it totally doesn't take into account, that analysis doesn't take into account that I am, as soon as somebody is nice to me, I'm going to be nice to them back, of course. It's a beneficial circle, an upward circle. I think cynicism and misanthropy, especially online misanthropy, which is based on, missing cues often, because the cues are not very well presented online by some people. Their kind of whole nature doesn't come across, especially in text only. And that's why the internet, when it was text only, was full of flame wars and was full of extreme aggression against people. Godwin's law being invoked every 10 minutes, because there was a huge scope for misunderstanding. Then emojis came along, and then gradually it shifted more to video, and there are more cues. This is why I like video much better, because of course I'm going to say what I say because of who I am and how I look and how I present myself, and I want there to be more cues, more theatricality. I want there to be at least as much information in me talking to you about my opinions and my views on things as there would be in a theatre piece or something. So I'm very much into the whole idea of the Goffman-esque presentation of self in everyday life. I think it's fine, and it's fine that it's not the truth. I don't really care what is the truth of myself. I suppose the mysterious origin of personality and of self, and this might go for whole peoples and whole cities and whole societies as much. Like, who are the British? Is there such a thing? Will there be such a thing in the future as the British when Scotland leaves and Northern Ireland leaves? Perhaps there won't be such a thing as British. I even have a song called British. Sometimes I feel so British I could die. But it's actually about being Japanese. I mean, the paradox in that song is, sometimes I feel so British, if you please, that I'm almost Japanese. And using Dirk Bogarde in the video, who of course was not born in Britain at all, but came to personify a certain idea of the Englishman. He was Dutch, his origins were Dutch. So yes, who knows what will be the future of the British person? Perhaps there won't be. And Morrissey even has a line saying, "We're the last truly British people you'll ever know." That feeds into a certain racism and a certain idea that we can make England great again or something. But I think he's really talking about English people, and that's, who knows? Who knows what he's havering, probably, as usual. Havering, Scottish word. You only know that word if you speak some Scottish. Like glaikit and dreich. It's very dreich today. English people can't even say dreich. Dreich. They say dreich rather than dreich. I'm havering, so I should probably stop here. I'm sure I've done my regulation 20 minutes. See you next time. Present to you next time.
I feel so far away.
Open University.
I'm running out of space again. So much to say. I'm signing off now. I hope you're chipper, toodle pip. Do try to keep in touch, keep your dander up, etc.